All right. I think we can go ahead and get started. We got the meeting recording going, and and we have a quorum with myself and Councilor Fenton. So this is the May 27th Maintenance and Development Committee meeting. Normally, this committee is chaired by Councilor Kateri Walsh, but she had a situation that did not allow her to be present today. So she had asked if I would chair the meeting along with Councilor Fenton, as we are the other two members of the committee. We're also joined by Councilor Orlando Ramos from Ward 8. And we have two items on the agenda, the first of which is a petition from Eversource Gas for a series of cabinet installations across the city of Springfield. This was referred to committee a few weeks ago with concerns raised by Councilor Fenton. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Councilor Fenton, and we can proceed through this item. Councilor Fenton.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. So basically my concern is this: we're looking at over a dozen locations across the city, many in high traffic areas and otherwise dangerous intersections. The monitoring equipment is currently underground. And as I understood it from Eversource Gas, the proposal is to move the equipment above ground with bollards to protect in the event that there is a vehicle that goes outside of the right of way and strikes the equipment. I have two concerns. The first is safety, and I've seen some similar installations that exist in the city with one or two or very few bollards that would leave the cabinets open to collisions with vehicles. And as I understand it, that could be a pretty dangerous and potentially catastrophic situation with the gas equipment above ground. And then the second issue that I have with it is just the visual impact to the city at all these different locations. So I don't know if there's anybody here from Eversource to speak in more detail about it, but the equipment is currently underground. It's worked that way for many years, and it would seem to me that with upgrading technology in the areas of radio frequency, we should have added ability to keep equipment underground instead of necessitate above ground moves where it creates visual and public safety issues.
Thank you, Councilor Fenton. So I see we have a few folks, Amos, Brian, and Richard. Are you all from Eversource? And I know we have Hector too, from Department of Public Works on our end. Are these other folks from Eversource, Hector?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yep.
So if you
Yes.
guys could just introduce yourselves, if you're able, just introduce yourselves and your role, and then maybe give us a little bit of an understanding relative to why this petition's coming forward.
Hello, I'm Richard Salvarezza. I'm an engineer with Eversource out of the Springfield division. We have Brian Meccarello. He's the lead engineer, my boss out of the Springfield division as well. And we have Amos Barnes, who is the project manager we've hired from Sargis Engineering to oversee the scheduling and so forth for this project. And I think that's all we have on call from Eversource. So I can talk about a couple of the concerns that Councilor Fenton brought up. So just a little bit of a background about what these devices actually are. So this is a safety program that the company is initiating as an extension to some of the other safety initiatives that we've implemented following up from the Merrimack Valley incident. Really the concern that is being addressed here is the safety of the low pressure system. And since 2018, there's been a lot of interest, certainly in Eversource and the rest of the utility companies in the area to make significant improvements to regulator stations, specifically regulator stations feeding the low pressure system. And as you guys know, we have an extensive GSEP program. Certainly we're doing a lot of work over the next 10 to 15 years in Springfield, specifically targeting priority main, which also aligns very closely with low pressure. So we're actively working to remove low pressure systems from service and replace them with, the medium pressure system, which is the modern setup. In the meantime, So between now and the time that those low pressure systems are eventually abandoned, the regulator stations that feed those low pressure systems will remain in service. And since Merrimack Valley, we've undertaken some pretty serious upgrades to the regulator stations, which include the installation of automatic shutoff valves. And that's a safety enhancement, significant safety enhancement for all those regulator stations feeding low pressure. And this is the second stage of that enhancement. Really, the idea being that these telemetry cabinets would be connected to those regulator stations, the automatic shutoff valves within them. And if there is an incident at the station that requires the automatic shutoff valve to close, a notification would be sent to gas control, and gas control, being the control center that monitors the system, would be able to deploy a crew out to the station to determine what's going on. We currently do not have that capability, so this would be a huge advantage just operationally for the company as far as responding quickly to abnormal events. But just to touch on a point that I made earlier, these cabinets are, I won't say they're temporary, but it is the intention to abandon the low pressure systems. And so these cabinets will not be around forever. They really will be around. They're tied to the age of the low pressure system, which is, steadily being replaced. A couple notes on aesthetics. We're tackling similar petitions elsewhere in various communities in and around the Springfield area, and some of the criticism we've received back is linked to the stainless steel finish on the cabinets. And so as far as aesthetics, we've actually made the decision to move away from the stainless steel. We're actually going to be putting in, it's like a forest green finish. It's a powder coated finish. So hopefully with that being installed, we can kind of blend in a little bit more with the environment. Certainly it is an option to install planters or plantings, whether it be arborvitaes or something like that, some sort of bush. We've done that quite a bit. So if there's a certain area that's of concern, we can certainly do that. If there's a park area, like say the Forest Park installation, we can certainly put some bushes in and around the cabinet to kind of obscure it a little bit. And just another note, Councilor Fenton, you brought up about traffic concerns. So, you may be right. There could be other cabinets elsewhere, whether it be an Eversource cabinet or a traffic control cabinet somewhere else in the city. All of our installations will have 4-inch steel concrete filled bollards, 4 of them in place surrounding the cabinet. So those are the same kind of bollards that we would use for a full-size regulator station or a large meter set. So they're pretty heavy-duty bollards. Not to say that they're invincible, but they will, they will they will have the ability to arrest a vehicle if need be. If it's coming in towards the cabinet. And then just another note on why these things are above ground. You're absolutely right. The majority of regulator stations in Springfield are below ground, installed in vaults. There's 2.
Good luck with that.
Go ahead, please.
No, you're fine, Richard. I think there was someone just joined. Councilor Davila just joined. I think wasn't muted yet. My apologies. Carry on.
No worries. If there's any questions, feel free to jump in. I know I'm kind of rambling on and on. Just in terms
Rick,
of, yes, go ahead.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
There's a way that those cabinets can be the height. You can find something smaller.
The height is linked to all of the equipment that we're really trying to cram into the cabinet. We've got 2 pressure transducers. We've got 2 sensors for the automatic shutoff valve. We've got battery backup, and we have our modem, which is kind of a dual purpose modem. So there's a lot that's getting crammed into these cabinets. It's already about as efficient as we can make it, unfortunately. And just a note on what,
do you have any, one of the things we were looking for at our last meeting was, any sort of rendering of the design?
absolutely. If you'd like, I could put that up on the screen now.
Yeah, you should be able to share your screen. Let me know if you can't.
Yep, I'm gonna put that up now.
And while you're doing that, Richard, if you could just finish the important point you were making about why this needs to be above ground and not underground.
Yes, so there's two real reasons there. The first reason is, you touched on it, Councilor Fenn, is the connectivity issue. So our vault doors on our stations are significantly reinforced steel. So with the purpose being that, a dump truck could roll over these things and they would not collapse. So we did reach out early on in the design phase of these devices to one of our consultants who they're experts in the control business, specifically around gas. And we were evaluating options for installing these in the vault. And the first point that they brought up was connectivity. They questioned the reliability of a wireless connection through the vault door, the hatch. And certainly they did mention that it would be possible, but the intermittent connection becomes a risk. And with these sorts of devices, we were really going for as reliable a connection as possible. The second issue they brought up, and when I heard this, I thought it was a little bit less of a concern, perhaps, was moisture. That these vaults are below ground. There's a lot of water in and around, seeping into the concrete from the ground. And normally with our gas infrastructure, it's mechanical device, it's all steel. It really doesn't have the vulnerability to moisture like electronics do. And that was one concern they brought up, was that putting electronics down in the vault could result in malfunctions down the road due to water. And then the third concern was the atmospheric concern. So if there's a small amount of gas venting into the vault through the normal operation of the regulator station, normally it's an inert area in the vault. There's no spark or anything like that. Our crews know how to handle that when they arrive at the station. But when we have electronics and things like that and entering into that atmosphere, it's something that we really wanted to avoid. They do have technology where it's sealed and explosion proof technology, but it was not something at the time that we had. The product that we're implementing is not offered with an explosion proof capability. So that's why this thing is being installed above ground in a cabinet. And I apologize for kind of rambling on and on there. Please let me know if you have any questions. You should see the design or the rendering on your screen now.
Yeah, just a few questions, if I may, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, yeah.
Richard, so do you have electronics in the cabinets now underground?
We have, in some of our stations, have a small electronic recording box, but the majority of the stations do not.
Do you have radio frequency technology so that you can communicate wirelessly with the stations underground?
Not currently.
So how do you communicate with them?
There's no communication with the stations currently. There's no telemetry.
Can you put the communication systems above ground and the electronics and leave everything else underground?
Essentially, all of what we're putting in here is some sort of an electronic component.
I see.
Yeah.
You said other communities. Where do you have these underground chambers that are being converted above ground in surrounding communities?
Just a clarification there. So the station itself, the majority of our stations in the Springfield area and in other communities in the Lawrence area, the Brockton area, for example, are contained in vaults. And so I would hesitate to call it a conversion. This is an additional facility we're adding to the existing station that really is just focused on telemetry. But where else do we have these below ground vaults? We're also putting these telemetry cabinets in Longmeadow, West Springfield, Northampton, Chicopee. Really, we're targeting. It's really tied to low pressure. So if there's communities that have low pressure, we're targeting those stations for telemetry, and it's a 3-year program. So you're going to be seeing more of this as we go, through time here. But yeah, Springfield is not alone in this initiative.
All right, to be respectful of everybody's time, I have one more question and then a comment.
Absolutely.
Where are the locations that you've got these approved for above ground telemetry cabinets in Longmeadow?
Amos, could you help me with that one? Could you jog our memory on that one? Do you have that at hand?
Rich, it's Hillside at Longmeadow.
I do.
And Laurel at Williams.
At Laurel, correct.
Really? Okay, thank you. And then the comment is, I think these have been some pretty good explanations. I'm still a little concerned about visual. So if we could come up with some type of landscaping plan for these to shield them from public view.
I see you.
Just to shield them from public view, maybe. I mean, the cabinets aren't that tall. How tall are they? 4 feet?
They're 5 feet 5 inches tall.
Okay. So 4 foot tall arborvitaes or something in that range would cut it.
Absolutely.
Rich,
Yes.
on page L19 on the drawings, there's something similar to that one. I don't know if you can.
L19.
I don't know, it's the same that I have here.
Oh, you may have a previous.
Bay and Meadow Road.
Let me try and catch up with you, Hector.
Yeah, because it's a picture of one. It's a green one. Maybe they have a.
Yeah, Richard, I think you
Better.
scrolled past it. If you go up one, there was an actual picture of one. Yeah.
Yeah, so this is
Okay.
certainly a picture of it. The only variation would be that it's painted green is
Right.
what we're going to be installing.
Richard, let me ask you a question. Councilor Fenton, did you have anything else to add? No, okay. I see Councilor Davila has his hand up. I just have a quick question, Richard, relative to the placement of these. So, I mean, there's a lot of locations across the city. I mean, are these going to be on tree belts, in the public way? I mean, where exactly is, I mean, it'll vary from place to place, but in general, where do these actually end up getting placed?
They are predominantly within the public right of way, generally in the tree belt. In the circumstances where there's room between the back of walk and the property line, we explore putting them, in that area. And then there are a handful of locations where we actually have to pursue some easements from some landowners.
Well, that's what I'm curious about, because a lot of these locations here, they're very general locations, but some of them are heavily residential. So I think I would want to see a breakdown of before our next meeting, which is June 7th. I'd want to see the plan for each location.
Absolutely.
If it's going to be impacting, residents and businesses and their actual private property, that is. And then I agree with Councilor Fenton about the landscaping. So I'd like to hear a commitment from that before the next meeting. And then finally, the safety issue. So let's say 18-wheeler goes through the barricade, totally takes one of these out. Is there any safety, any impact to the system from that?
There's no impact to the regulator station itself. In the event that the cabinet is destroyed, gas control would lose contact with the station and it would trigger an alarm, and a technician would be sent over at that time. Certainly, I would expect the police would see, we're gonna have stickers on these cabinets that say, Eversource emergency phone number.
Mhm.
So, the police would probably be called at the same time. But yeah, we're certainly gonna know if there's an issue at the station immediately. If there was a vehicle damage. Yeah.
So the general gist is that this is going to improve round-the-clock communication between the regulator station and headquarters in the event of any sort of failure that could pose a public health risk or a public safety risk.
That's correct. I wouldn't say it improves it, it adds it. So we don't have 24/7 visibility today. This will add 24 visibility in the future.
What would happen now if the regulator station failed?
If the regulator station failed today, the automatic shutoff valve would actuate. It would interrupt the flow to the station, and we would potentially lose pressure on the downstream side of the regulator station, which could cause an outage.
How would we know it happened? That the outage would be reported?
The outage would be reported by customers calling in. We do have limited telemetry within the system, not located necessarily at the regulator stations, but there are a handful of these similar cabinets that are installed at satellite locations. And so there is some visibility there, and there is the capability to be alerted, but there's not quite enough of them to get that ideal visibility as far as what's happening in most areas in the system.
Okay. We're also joined now by Councilor Hurst. Councilor Davila, did you have a question?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon to everybody. I'm outside the elements. If you hear background noise, my apologies. Richard, thank you for that good explanation. You have provided a lot of technical information. But I just want to echo briefly the same concerns as Councilor Fenton expressed before about aesthetics. In my ward, in my neighborhood, Forest Park, this is going to, in my opinion, create a challenge, a real challenge with the general vista of the neighborhood. From what I'm hearing from you, it seems like this is something that should be done. From what I gathered from the technical information you have provided. Regarding the aesthetics, I got two things. One, as I was suggesting, if we can put shrubbery on it just to cover it and integrate it more to the general atmosphere. And two, trying to think outside of the box. Do you think that we can't, Eversource can collaborate with UMass, I think it was UMass, to paint those boxes similarly to what they did in downtown area? Is it something that could be worked on with Eversource in collaboration with UMass?
Are you referring to like a mural type program?
Yeah.
I think that's a very interesting idea.
Because I could see a scenario, at least in my neck of the woods, where we could take those, what you call the cabinets, and just paint them with something neighborhood specific.
Yeah, that's a very interesting idea. And Councilor, do you have any contacts with the UMass program that you're referring to?
I'm sure that somebody at City Hall does.
Okay.
But I think it's something that should come from Eversource's initiative, because if we are going to do this throughout the city, it needs to make sense, so we don't have metal all over the place.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. And I personally have no issues with that, so long as the emergency stickers aren't obstructed by the paint.
Right. Right.
So let me think about how we can coordinate that with UMass.
Okay.
I will certainly, if it's acceptable, draft a letter expressing our intention to install arborvitaes as completely as possible. So in other words, if we only have space to install arborvitaes on 2 of the 4 sides, we'll certainly pursue that. But for example, if there's a walkway or a sidewalk or a curb in the way and we can't, accommodate a planting, we certainly wouldn't be able to put one in. So I can certainly draft a letter to the council, expressing that intention. And then I could also add, open it up to UMass and express our intention to interface with them on that mural program.
Excellent. And Richard, would you be able to provide us with your contact information to follow up? I can give you my email, vidavilla@springfieldcityhall.com.
Okay. If you'd like, I can reply to this meeting invite, and everyone in attendance would have my contact as well.
That's fine. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Davila. Councilor Fenton, followed by Councilor Hurst.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to follow up, Richard, you were talking about if the cabinet gets taken out. So if it gets taken out, what is the nature of the risk of an explosion, a gas explosion in relation to that collision?
Oh, that's a difficult question to answer. We do, so a note to add about, so let me talk through the scenario. So a large vehicle traveling at great speed impacts the cabinet, and the cabinet's damaged, resulting in gas that begins to vent uncontrolled. So what I will add there is that there's 2 gas lines heading to the cabinet. The low pressure line is less of a concern. The low pressure system has far less energy, and the gas stream venting would be rather insignificant. It's obviously something we would remediate on an emergency basis, as soon as possible. The high pressure line has more energy, and so this one is of greater concern. The high pressure line will have an excess flow valve installed along it. So what that is it's a valve that it has the ability to detect in a mechanical sort of way an increase in flow, and it will just automatically trip and stop the flow of gas. This is a very similar valve that's installed on most of our new service lines today, where, for example, if a backhoe digs through a service line and rips it clear off, and you have full flow through the line, that excess flow valve will detect that higher flow rate and close automatically. And so that high pressure line leading to this cabinet will be equipped with one of those. And so the venting gas would be arrested at that point for a certain period of time. So,
Hey, Rich.
Yes, go ahead.
I just hop in. Sorry, this is Brian Mackrell. Just to add that it's only going to be localized just to that above ground cabinet. It would have no impact on the system overall. So if a car were to take that thing out, you'd pretty much have that just localized gas leaking there. It wouldn't affect the whole system to have any issues downstream. I don't know if that's where you're going, or you're just worried about just the cabinet.
Well, yeah, I'm trying to figure out worst case scenario, which isn't that crazy of a scenario because these are close to highly trafficked areas. So car takes it out, there's an explosion on the site. How big can the explosion be, and how expansive could the explosion be, worst case scenario?
No, like Rich said, they have those EFV devices on the high pressure line. So those are gonna pretty much, as soon as those snap off and it detects that high pressure release, it shuts off and there's no more gas. And then on the low pressure side, it's just a small stream of gas that wouldn't cause an explosion at all. It just kind of migrating and then vent to atmosphere, because you're going to be right out in the open at that point.
I understand. And I appreciate you guys giving the very thorough engineering expertise, but you got to kind of speak baby talk to me. So if that happens and the gas valve shuts off, are we talking about like a 2-foot blast area, a 10-foot blast area, a 20-foot? What are we looking at?
There would likely not be a blast. Generally, when we expect explosions from natural gas, it's generally when gas is accumulating within a structure, and there's a significant air mixture in there that is creates an explosive environment. This is not a situation like that. The worst case scenario you would get is a fire.
Thank you.
You would get a
That's all.
sustained fire. You would not see an explosion.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah.
I guess you misunderstood my earlier question because I asked that question about 5 minutes ago and you just told me you would just lose communication.
Oh,
So,
I apologize.
that's okay.
Mhm.
Councilor Hurst?
Thank you, Councilor Letterman. I actually just wanted to add to Councilor Davila's suggestion and just say, one, that I think it's a great idea in terms of having some of our local artists, not necessarily UMass per se, but having some of our local artists in conjunction with the Mass Cultural Council, maybe in conjunction with Britt Rue and her organization, which is doing the mural, the fresh painting murals in Mason Square, to potentially have Eversource maybe allocate some funding to allow the artists to paint these boxes. And so, Councilor Davila, I'll certainly give you Britt's number in the event that that's something that Eversource would like to do, and maybe folks can coordinate with the Mass Cultural Council and some local artists to do that design work.
Right.
So I think it's a great idea. Thank you, Councilor Letterman.
Thank you, Councilor Hurst. Okay, so it looks like, I think, Councilor Fenton, were you all set? Was your hand up from before?
No, well said. Thank you.
So I think what we should probably do is by June 7th, hopefully you guys can bring the commitment on the landscaping, connect with Councilor Davila about any potential, art-based activities at the potential sites. And then also, I want to see I'd actually like to see the plans for each site, especially those that are going to impact private property. But I would like to see the plans for each site. And I also think that if we're going to be doing sort of public art around them also, that, we consider which ones are sort of in more public areas as opposed to on anybody's property and that sort of thing. Obviously, that'll have to be considered. Can you guys provide that by the June 7th meeting?
Yes.
Okay. So Councilor Davila has his hand up. We'll give Councilor Davila last word on this item, and then we'll move to the second item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question to follow up on Councilor Fenton's point about potential fire. Richard, if I heard you correctly, you said there could be a potential for a fire, not an explosion. And my immediate thought was the immediate vicinity of the cabinet. Is there any kind of guidelines as to what it is allowed near the cabinet and what is not allowed near the cabinet?
Generally the cabinets are going within the public right of way. So I have no concern of other structures being built in the future, or we're certainly not building these near an existing building or structure. Presumably the vehicle that would strike the cabinet would be impacted by the fire, the hypothetical fire. But yeah, is that answering your question, Councilor?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. We'll follow up before the 7th with any questions offline. Thank you guys very much for being here. And we're going to move to our second agenda item, which is the towing contract. My apologies. So I know we have Tom Moore here. This was referred to committee a few weeks ago. So Tom, why don't you go ahead and give us a recap on what this item is intended for, and then we can open it up for questions.
Thank you, Councilor. I'll be very brief. The last time I was before the council, I presented the item as essentially procedural cleanup of two contracts which are related to the city's relationship with the parking authority in performing its on-street operations. One of those is towing. So this is the towing management contract that exists between the city and the parking authority, which authorizes the parking authority to conduct that activity on the city's behalf and to go out and get a vendor to get a contract to do those services. So the vendor's contract, the vendor's currently CJ's Towing, vendor's contract expires at the end of November of this year. So looking back at the history of the prior contracts, they didn't match up. The terms were kind of staggered. So what we're doing with these proposed amendments is taking those old contracts, running them to the end of November of this year, at which time the council would be presented with a whole new batch of contracts to look at, which would be the result of a procurement the parking authority is going to be performing to try to get a new vendor or a new contract for the towing union.
Okay.
Part of that is an agreement with the city. I'm sorry, the city and the parking authority. The other part is a lease for an overflow lot. This lot's on Chandler Street. It's been in operation for towing operations for a little over a decade. It's again something where we're matching up a lease term to expire in November, so we can have a new lease term as a part of the new procurement under a new contract, either with the same vendor or a new vendor, depending who wins that bid.
Thank you. Just so folks know, with Councilor Fenton's exit, we've actually lost our quorum, so we're sort of meeting for informational purposes at this point.
That's okay. I'm here to answer any questions. It's very much a housekeeping matter.
We can certainly proceed. So, Councilor Ramos.
Mr. Chair, thank you. Tom, how did we, Attorney Moore, how do we get to this point in terms of historically? I know that there was a time where the city of Springfield actually had sort of a rotating agreement with different vendors. So can you sort of explain to us as to how we came from that to having an exclusive contract with this one vendor?
Sure. Yeah, that's exactly right, Counselor. At one time, there was what's referred to as the Towing Alliance, and it was this list of towing vendors who were called in like a predetermined order that would would rotate over time, and they would each get called in the case of an incident, and they would go down the list. If somebody didn't answer, they go to the next person, etc. So that was ultimately done away with. I believe it was under the control board. My history might be a little off on that, but the idea was that there were some accusations that there was favoritism going on within the selection of vendors. Again, this is far before my time at the agency, so I can't really speak to how it operated. But my understanding was that there was some complaints that certain vendors were only getting the calls, and that other vendors were never getting calls, or would conveniently be called at a time when they were busy with another job or something like that. And ultimately, they decided, we should maybe be better off streamlining this. Let's procure a contract, try to get these vendors to compete against each other to get a good price. And I think what they were looking at is gaining some operational efficiency by saying, no matter who calls in a tow, it's going to be, they have one number to call and there's one vendor responsible, and that's somebody to hold more accountable. I suppose there's a number of reasons why the Towing Alliance is something that people did not want to revisit. That being said, it's certainly open to discussion as to whether, that's something that makes sense going toward the future. Again, this contract is up in November. So, that's something that, can certainly be discussed.
And how long is the contract for again?
This current contract, we wanted to say was 3 years with an option for 2 more. One of those options was exercised just basically because of COVID and us not knowing what we were going to get for pricing last year, but knowing that we're at the end of that tunnel. We plan on going back out in November. So the contract we would go out for is still up for debate. I mean, really, to be totally frank, that's the city's kind of direction to the parking authority. In many ways, we're waiting to get that instruction from the city and say, we want you to go out for a longer term contract. We would like it to be a 2-year or 5-year. They're sort of giving marching orders in that capacity to the SPA so that we can go bid that contract the way they would like.
Now, do you know whether or not there were other bidders at the last time that this went out for procurement?
Yes, I do. I was there at that time. There was only one bidder at that time, and that was a source of great frustration. I can say for sure. Where I'm not certain if we did that bid twice or the one before it twice, but I've done this bid a few times and we've gotten one response several times. So there's, I have some ideas as to how to craft bids, going forward that allows. I don't want to say allows for more competition because we certainly made it quite broad the last couple of times, but maybe would encourage groups from coming in for cooperative proposals, things that would be able to have it instead of a single vendor. Perhaps we're looking to have a very small group of vendors perform that service who would be united as one group, and something to that effect. Again, I want as much competition as possible because that ultimately results in, I think, the best price for the city and for the people. So I'm open to kind of any and all suggestions on how to make that happen, having gone through this a few times and only ended up with some very, very few bids. I agree. I think that, it doesn't make me feel comfortable at all, the fact that we have one bidder the last time around, and it's very likely that we're still only going to have one bidder. That doesn't fare well for us in terms of pricing and competition. But my bigger concern is around the way that, and I mentioned this at the last regular meeting, and one of the reasons why this was sent to committee is because of the way that this contractor's employees treat certain people in the city of Springfield, and received numerous complaints about the way that they operate in the city. I just received another complaint last week about unwarranted towing in Springfield Housing Authority, where they've it seems or one of my constituents feels targeted because they've been towed several times, even though they have the proper permitting. Those kind of things are concerning because we hear them over and over from different neighborhoods, and it just makes me wonder, what sort of what sort of process do we have in place for people to file complaints, and what we can do as a legislative authority to hold them accountable. If they are going to be, operating in our city and working under a contract for the city of Springfield, then we should have some sort of criteria and some sort of standard for them to adhere to. So I want to get your thoughts as to what we can do legislatively to hold them accountable for their behavior towards our constituents. Yeah, I think it's a good question, Counselor. We take very seriously any complaints you receive of any nature related to this contract. Many times people, involved in any instance of towing, there's going to be some issue, sometimes founded with concerns about service provided. So there is a complaint process. People are allowed to file a complaint with the vendor, and the vendor reports to us for complaints that go unresolved, so to speak. And then there is also an avenue directly to the parking authority, which is mainly what we would encourage, is that people come and, speak to the parking authority and say, I've had an incident with the towing operations, or I'm concerned about a towing fee or something, or if they feel like they're being targeted. That's something that can be done directly to the SPA. We have management that oversees that contract that then kind of conducts an investigation. We take very seriously these types of accusations. We've had many complaints over the years of on-street parking in general, meters and all the towing that gets associated and booting that gets associated with that. So, we try to do our best to flush out if there's any issue. I'm trying to think back to the history of the contract. There are times where we have vendors where we're looking at a situation where we have issues with maybe someone who's working there who's not representing the agency like we'd like. And, at that point, we exercise authority to say, we'd like you to reassign that person to a different contract and not work on our contract. And, that's something that's within our rights to do. And in the past with vendors, we've done that, and so I would highly encourage people to contact the parking authority directly if they have a concern about any of the vendors. That goes for any of the operators or the writers or any of the towing operators. They have a very difficult job, and it's a very difficult circumstance doing that job often, but there's a way, I think, Counselor, you're referring to, that treats everybody with respect, that makes sure that we handle this with the utmost professionalism. And that's something I strive for everything we do. And it's similar to what we're asking from our police department, is just to have a process for people to be able to file complaints. And maybe that's the one of the solutions that we can talk about. I don't feel comfortable with having them file complaints directly to the vendor. I think the solution would be for them to file the complaints with the parking authority. But how do we get that word out, and how do we make that a requirement is the question, right? So is there any way that we can require them to post at their location the contact number for the parking authority, for example, for them for folks who have complaints about a tow, and or is there a way that we can require them to carry business cards that and this is one of the ideas that I threw out there at the last meeting, is maybe we should think about having them carry business cards that have the information as to how to file a complaint, and then be required to pass out those business cards to people that they interact with. I don't know, just a couple of ideas. What are your thoughts on those? I think those are great ideas, Council. And I think, just off the top of my head, I think the best way to try to accomplish that would be through the the bidding contracting process that we're going to do in November. It's where we have written into the contract, they have certain requirements for posting certain signages at their property that direct them to file complaints to the parking authority, that they have an obligation to, do certain reporting to the parking authority in that capacity, that they have an obligation to have their employees have on-person identificational cards that say who is being the company of the tow and how to file a complaint and who to go to, again, citing to our authority. I think it makes a lot of sense, and we could do that through the contract. I think that would be effective.
Okay. All right. Yeah, if we can do that through the contract without having to take any legislative action, that's even better.
Yeah, and the council ultimately is going to look at this in November anyway, so we'll be able to revisit to make sure the language is something you guys are comfortable with.
Okay, sounds good. I think that's a great solution. So, thank you. Appreciate that.
No, good idea. What's your idea? Good idea.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you, Councilor Ramos. I agree wholeheartedly. One quick question or two quick questions for you, Tom, and then I think we'll be good.
Sure.
One on the contract. Does the contract also control the fees, or do we set the fees, or does the vendor set the fees?
So there's a series of fees. It's a good question.
Well,
I think all the above is true.
I mean, I know we set the tickets, right? But the tow fee, the storage fee,
right?
Where is that set and in what process?
Those are regulated under Mass General Law. So I think it's the Department of Public Utility regulates towing. I have to check on exactly which department, but they set the maximum amount you can file for any of those fees. That is basically what the towing operator does in our city and everywhere else in the Commonwealth. They're restricted to a certain number. I think it's $108 for the actual tow fee. That being said, there are other fees that go with it. So there's the storage fee, which is regulated a certain amount, and we have a percentage of both of those that we end up with as the city from the contract. Then there's also an administrative fee that the city has. That is something that's under our control. So there's a $30 tow fee per tow that's just for the city's administrative costs of conducting the operation of towing and booting and collecting money, et cetera. So that's something that's set by the council and could be altered without state law altering. That being said, if you wanted to change the pricing for like the towing or the storage, it would end up being something that we go through like special act type process where we'd have the legislature take up, how do we reduce or increase the fee? I think it was recently increased. I want to say it was within the last like 5 years or so. It went up to 180, used to like 97 or something, 93.
The state law, it sets the maximum, but who decides within that? Like, what if you want to say this maximum is 108, right? Are they charging 108 because they can, because that's the maximum?
Yeah, I think that's right. And, if we wanted to entertain the idea of restricting the number they could charge, I think we could do it probably contractually. Like we were discussing before, where you could put a cap and say, notwithstanding what you're allowed to charge under this contract, we're going to limit you to charge this much. Yeah. That's something you could look at. And I think you'd probably, finance would be good to talk to for that sort of thing, because they're going to be looking at what that would do to our numbers, obviously, or what, depending on what we did. But yeah, I think you could investigate doing that through the contract.
I think we just want to make sure, I think, this was raised at the last meeting as well, that we're being fair and not, unnecessarily punitive to folks, right? It's a pretty well understood fact, for families and individuals who have less income that, having your car towed can be the end of your car. I mean, with how quickly fees rack up, it can, can easily be, a situation where you're not going to be able to get the car back, or that the fees end up accumulating, even higher than the worth of the car. I mean, I've certainly,
it does happen
that have been challenging. So I think we want to just take a look at that. Maybe if we could get a summary of all the fees and who's in charge of what at some point. I think that
no problem. Yeah, I can do that. I have a table I can easily get to you guys. No problem.
And then my final question was just relative to this actual vote. Is the what we're doing here? This is just the contract between the city and the SPA, right?
It's been running month to month. It's been running month to month for a while now, and I think part of the reason it did that was because the city was unsure whether it was going to do any renewal at all with the vendor, or whether we were going to do everything bidding last year. And then, by the time we got into decision-making mode, you had the COVID pandemic kind of come down, and it was, well, maybe we're better off extending another year and bidding when it's over. So if you look at the contract, it's been running month to month for a while now. And putting, my attorney hat on, I would love to have all these documents match up correctly, and right now they don't. So that's sort of what we're looking at with these amendments.
So a vote for this is essentially a vote to say we're going to extend our agreement with the SPA
Yes.
to November 30th to
Correct.
line up with our agreement with the vendor.
With the SPA's agreement with the vendor, correct?
The SPA's agreement. So
Yeah, because the city has
ultimately,
installation there.
bring us a new agreement between the city of Springfield and the SPA and a contract to vote on for the vendor. We ultimately vote on the vendor contract, even though you would.
In a way you do, because what you're doing is you have approval for any vendor we choose. So you do, but what we would do at that time, I'd want to have everything together. So like my vision for this is, and this has been a long time in the making with, is to have everything in front of you guys at one time. Here's the lease, the Chandler Street Overflow Lot. Do we want to accept that or not? Here's the contract between the SPA and the city to run this program. And here's the SPA's proposed contract with the vendor for approval, all kind of at the same time. And within that umbrella, you have everything to do with towing in the city. Everything can be addressed at one time. And then, the council can look at that and say, okay, you selected this vendor. Why did you do that? And we can go through the whole process and answer every question there is, because everything will be lined up correctly and we will have a new contract to be proposing.
Okay, excellent. Well, those are all my questions, and we are the only two left. So at this time,
that's all right.
If you have any questions, Attorney Moore, we will declare this meeting adjourned.
No, go enjoy the afternoon. I will try to do the same.
Thank you.